Welcome back, everyone. I have with me Daniel Maigler, and he is the mental health advisor for Paws for Patrick. And we are going to talk all about emotional support animals. What does it mean to have an emotional support animal? Who would benefit from an emotional support animal? How do you go about getting one? All of these questions that I think so many people have, we are going to try to answer for you here in this episode. But I want to start by having you introduce yourself for everyone watching. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm Dan Maigler, and I'm a high school social worker and a therapist in private practice. I have a podcast called Not Allowed to Die, which is a mental health podcast where I talk about how treatment works or sometimes doesn't work. And
Mm,
as you said, I'm the mental health advisor for Paws for Patrick, where I help educate people, regular families and therapists, about emotional support animals and how they work in supporting particularly young people to view their best selves. So that's a big part of what I do.
yeah, you want to start with just telling us a little bit about Pause for Patrick, what that organization is and does, and maybe how it came about. And then I think we'll dive into talking specifics about emotional support animals.
Yeah. So in my role as a school social worker, I got to work with Patrick Romer, and I worked with him from his freshman through his senior year. And Patrick had a lot of challenges with depression, anxiety, and when Patrick was struggling, he wasn't the kind of kid who liked to share his feelings in a therapeutic setting. There might be days when he would be so overwhelmed and stressed out that he would come down to my office and he would just say, I just want to go home and be with Cece. And so we would find a way for him because when he could be with Cece, his dog, he could pet her and hug her, and he could normalize his heart rate and he could feel more relaxed. So unfortunately, during the pandemic, I didn't get to have contact. He was a senior. It was his senior year. And Patrick was actually having a good experience with his family. They organized the Pet Olympics. They were bonding, but he had a really bad day in May of 2020, and he died by suicide that day. And again, for his family, for me, everyone who loved him was just so incredibly devastated. And a GoFundMe was created to try to help support the family. And the family said, we don't really need this money for ourselves. We want to do something that will honor Patrick's legacy. We know what we want it to be about: mental health and animals. And so the idea just came together to say, how can we get people that kind of support and nurturing that Patrick got from Cece to as many other families as possible?
Yeah. Wow. I think it's such a story that so many people can relate to these days because our teens and young adults are really going through it. It feels
Hmm.
like more than ever.
Hmm.
And that may or may not be completely accurate, but it just feels like they need more support and more discussion about feelings. I think that, many generations were raised not to talk about your feelings,
Hmm.
and some feelings are bad. And I think we're learning through our young people how important that is and how much we need to support them in those areas.
Well, the research would back up what you're saying, that it has actually never been harder to be a teenager,
Mm,
and anxiety and depression have never been higher among these kids.
yeah.
And again, people say why, and I think we all intuitively feel that it has something to do with comparison, social media, and those kinds of things.
Hmm.
And so that's what we're finding. People are, particularly young people, between the ages of 13 and 25, our developmental goal is to find our identity. And that identity is tougher to find when you're constantly feeling like you're being compared and you never get to take a
Hmm.
step off of that treadmill of comparison and you never really feel like you're measuring up. And as adults, we do that. We look at who's having the best vacation, who's
Yep.
living in the nicest house. But for teenagers, it's extra exhausting. And again, when I was growing up, there was only one phone in the house, and we had to share it among the
Yep.
siblings and whatnot. So, and you were actually able to go to bed and not worry about what was happening everywhere. So, for so many kids, and
Yeah,
particularly our
I
kids with
can't
ADHD or kids who are they're
imagine
just wanting
what our
connection and
kids
they're not
are
knowing
going
how
through
to
now,
break off of it.
as far as like always
Hmm.
having to worry about what people are saying
Hmm.
about you publicly, right? Who
Hmm.
is it's tough. I have two young adults and they are constantly trying to navigate difficult social situations online
Hmm.
and worrying about how that might impact their future, right? If they're
Hmm.
on a conversation that's been recorded and somebody says something, then they need to worry about that and future employers finding it. And it's just such a different world. And I think unless we really take time to discuss it and think deeply about it, like we are here, we don't recognize it, but we really need to.
Well, and that's why animals are so much more even incredibly powerful now because you can
Mm,
talk to them and they're not going to pick up their phone while you're talking.
right, right.
They're going to
They're
give
not
you
going to
their
take a
full
video.
no, they're going to give you their full and undivided attention. And we know the research says that just staring in the eyes of a dog can increase the production of oxytocin, which is that connection hormone, which helps people to feel bonded. Some of the research by Dr. Janet Gerlach of University of Toledo found that cats are actually better than dogs in helping to reduce symptoms of depression. So I found that really fascinating because I'm more of a
Yeah.
dog person.
Hmm.
But and there's a lot of misconceptions about emotional support animals. People think of dogs when they think of emotional support animals, but an emotional support animal is just any animal that being in contact with it reduces the frequency, intensity, or duration of any mental health symptoms that a person may experience. So again, we think of you can have an emotional support animal that's a tarantula, that's a lizard,
Yep.
that's a fish. It doesn't have to be a dog or a cat or something furry. And people often think that they have to get their animal registered. But the registration of emotional support animals is not for the pet, it's for the person. So when
Hmm.
I, as a therapist, am writing an emotional support animal letter, what I'm saying is that in my clinical judgment, the person that I'm talking to has a disability that the symptoms may be benefited by contact with an animal. That's all I'm saying as a clinician. So it doesn't have to be proven, it doesn't have to be anything. And that bar for what a disability is not nearly as high as what we would think of as if you're trying to get funding for Social Security or things like that or
Right,
workman's
right.
comp.
Hmm.
The law is written to make sure that almost everyone, particularly if they have anxiety, depression, those kind of things, if they're on the autistic spectrum, they will pretty much automatically qualify for getting an emotional support animal.
Wow. In that letter, I can just imagine people wondering, why do I need a letter to have an emotional support animal? That gives you the rights to have that animal in certain environments where maybe it would otherwise be prohibited, right?
Right. So the letter is primarily for where you live. So if you have an emotional support animal letter, and if you live in housing that's covered by FHA, so like apartments that have more than like 4 units and that are not necessarily owner occupied, then they have to allow you to have your animal, no matter what kind of animal it is, no matter what the breed is, they have to allow you to have it, and they can't charge you pet fees. And so this is all can also apply to, colleges and universities, and sometimes they may ask for things like extra forms to be filled out. And very frequently, what they're asking for is in violation of the law. They're not allowed to ask you what your disability is. They're not allowed to, but they sometimes do. And then sometimes you have to get HUD involved. Or I was literally just emailing with a college student who she may have to have a Title IX investigation at her college because they're giving her a lot of pushback about getting her cat in her dorm room. So
Yeah.
sometimes it can be challenging. But again, it really does mostly apply to just your dwelling. So people who talk about, oh, there's all these emotional support animals and they're in the supermarket and they're wherever else. Well, that legally, your emotional support animal doesn't have any right in most states to be in anywhere other than your dwelling.
Okay.
So when you see animals out and about, the only ones that have the legal right to be anywhere are service animals. And service
Gotcha.
animals are those like we think of like seeing eye dogs, or there are animals that are trained to spot epilepsy or for
Hmm.
diabetes and those kind of things. So those are animals that get specific training to remediate and help out with a specific disability. And there are psychiatric service animals, and it takes about $12,000 to $15,000 to train one, and they're very, bonded to the person. But those are not pets; those are working animals. Whereas
Yeah.
ESAs are more, they can be your pet. And in the middle between ESAs and service animals are therapy dogs, or they can be therapy horses or facility dogs. So if you go to a hospital or a school and they have a dog that just stays there and helps people out, well,
Yeah.
they get a certain level of training to make sure that they're non-reactive, that they're going to be able to be
Hmm.
pet by random strangers and also not be too interested in going and getting food from the garbage, things like that.
Right,
So
right.
they have so the training to become like a therapy dog, it takes several months, and it's a couple about 1,200 to 50, depending on where you are, dollars. And if people are curious about could my dog become a therapy dog and go and visit other people and help them out, they should go to Alliance for Therapy Dogs, which is a great place to find more information about getting their animal trained or if their animal will be a good fit. so many animals just don't have the temperament. They're a little too hyper, or
Yeah.
they're, but so again, it's a great service. And at Paws for Patrick, we do have a team of therapy dog handlers, but that group is only in the Chicago area, just north of Chicago, where we do our visits. So our
Yeah.
ESA work is national. So anyone around the country, if they have a young person in their life, or if they're parenting young people, so if a person is 57 but they're dealing with depression or anxiety themselves, and they could benefit from an emotional support animal, they can go to Paws for Patrick's website, and we can help provide them up to $500 to acquire an animal and up to $500 for training of that animal. So, and that's just some basic skills training. And our goal is just to help as many people as we possibly can.
It's amazing. It's amazing. We're dog people, and I see such a difference in all of us when we just take a minute and sit with the dog and be present with the dog. And we just got a new dog not even a month ago, and we're finding already that he senses when he thinks that someone is upset or our
Hmm.
other dog is upset, and he will come and be with you, which is amazing, you know. And I
Hmm.
think they have a lot of times those instincts
Hmm.
to be really supportive. The other thing I was thinking about as you were talking, one of my kids graduated from college a couple of years ago. There were all kinds of emotional support animals in her dorms, which I
Hmm.
was really surprised about because I thought, wow, you know, it must be really tough to get that approved. But I was really
Hmm.
happy to see that it's possible now. You know,
Hmm.
there were cats, there was a rabbit, there were all sorts of different
Hmm.
animals all over her campus for that, which I was really, really thankful to see because I think that you know, we just need to be more open to the things that work for people. What is going to help someone feel safe in an environment? Like I imagine that Patrick, when he was at school and he would say, all I want is to go home and be with my dog, he
Hmm.
didn't feel safe at school. He didn't feel
Hmm.
settled and secure. And here on this podcast, you know, our audience, most of the kids that we have that struggle. They don't
Hmm.
feel safe in different environments. And so imagining just having an animal that can help to temper some of that is such a gift. Um,
Well, and it also helps with that interaction socially. For so many people who have
mm,
social anxiety disorder, or,
yeah,
again, whether it's awesome, like making eye contact with people can be really challenging. But when you have the dog, like I know the names of more of my neighbors' dogs than I know the names of my
yeah,
neighbors.
right.
It just really helps as a lubrication to help that social interaction. It helps
Mm,
not just the person on that floor that has the cat, but the 4 or 5 other people who are going to get to interact with that cat, at different times. And
mm-hmm,
again, I think we should think about it like the way we think about music. We all know that music helps people to feel best, to match their mood. But we have to be respectful of others when we're listening to our music. We can't be blasting our music at 3 in the morning.
mm-hmm,
And similarly with our animals, we have to make sure our animals are not causing others discomfort. So whether that's taking care of their fur and their dander and their waste, whether it's making sure that they're not loud at different times. So again, another role that I have as a clinician when I'm helping people is to say, is this going to be the right animal for the space and time that you're in right now? So you might want a giant husky, but is it good for both the husky and for you to be in a little dorm room? Maybe a rabbit is a better fit for right now. So at Paws for Patrick, we almost say never say no, but we might say not yet. Let's try to find something that's
yeah,
because we really want to make sure that the pairing is sustainable because it is really uncomfortable for people when that animal has to be rehomed. So,
mm-hmm,
and people wonder about like, what is the ethics? Are all these therapists who people reach out to about emotional support animals, do they just give a letter to everyone? And the answer is no. But more often than not, our bias is going to be to say yes, just like we would say yes to a person exercising or a person listening to music.
yeah.
Why wouldn't we say yes unless there was a good reason not to?
Yeah. I can imagine some people feel like distraction is an issue. I can remember
Hmm.
when my son was really young in like elementary school and he would have different like tools or things for maybe focusing like fidgets or you know
Hmm.
one teacher had given him some games so if he was like working a puzzle or something he was able to listen better, right? But what
Hmm.
happened was all the other kids wanted to see what he was doing all the time. And it wasn't a problem for the teacher, but it was a problem for him. He didn't want to be a distraction. He didn't want kids to be like
Hmm.
crowding around and asking him questions, right? And so he would often
Hmm.
resist some of that. But I think also
Hmm.
too, I can hear like, professors in a college or teachers in a high school saying this is such a distraction. Everybody wants to pet the animal or something like that. So how do
Hmm.
you help people navigate those conversations and those challenges?
Well, and again, it would be, for most of the people who have an ESA, it's not going to be in the school. It's not going to be
Okay.
in the classrooms.
Right.
And if it's more of that like service animal level, it would be saying like, well, could a wheelchair be distracting? Could a person coming in with crutches be
Mm-hmm.
distracting? Yeah, it could be distracting, but if that's what that person needs in order to be able to access that environment appropriately, then it just isn't up for the professor
Right.
to debate. And we find that with therapy, and that's why, again, that extra training for therapy dogs and service animals is that they're working and they're really trained well to not be distracting to others. If
Mm-hmm.
other people are distracted by that, to say that we just, hey, if a person's truly beautiful or handsome, they might be distracting, but we don't ban them from classes,
Right.
so.
Such a good point. Yeah. Yeah. And I think too that dies down over time. People get
Hmm.
really interested about something new,
Hmm.
but eventually they're going to get used to it.
Hmm.
Um, and I would hope that a lot of schools would be open to it because, as I said, my son really struggled in that environment. And oh my gosh, if he had had an animal with him, just, an hour a day at school, like if the school had a dog that was there, it would have made a huge difference. And just helping him to feel safe and having his nervous system be settled. So I hope that we keep moving forward in this direction of having more and more animals being part of therapy, being part of environments where people struggle.
Well, and if there are people listening to this and they think a facility dog, that's what we call a dog, like a therapy dog that stays at the school, and if they think a facility dog would be a good thing for their school, they should reach out to their school board members and say, we support this. A lot of people who are unfamiliar with facility dogs have a lot of fears about insurance and what if the dog bites someone or what if there's allergies. And what schools who have facility dogs have found is that they're just really, these problems don't occur, that the
Yeah.
animals that are trained to be facility dogs are picked because they are non-reactive. They also do. There are insurance policies. So God forbid something were to happen, and that gets calculated into the cost of having it. And that's an area of future growth for Paws for Patrick. Eventually, we want to get more into that space of helping schools to have those conversations with their school boards, with their administrators, to say, again, if we can help one family by putting an animal in there, we can help thousands of kids sometimes if we can get that facility dog that's there working. And so that is an area of future growth. And I hope more schools will be open to it.
Yeah, me too. Definitely. I was just thinking as you were talking, uh, when my son comes to talk to me about stuff that he finds challenging to talk about, he will call the dog up on his lap. And I just now made that connection
Hmm.
that every time we have a difficult conversation or something, that he just
Hmm.
is struggling with emotionally, he's calling the dogs up to him before he even starts.
Hmm.
And I had not really thought about it that deeply until we've had this conversation. So it's just amazing that there are so many options to
Hmm.
help with mental health. And we just need to keep having these conversations so more people know about it. I mean, I can imagine a world where every school has a therapy dog. That would be just amazing. Sensory rooms and all of these other things that so many students need. And I think more now, my kid was mostly in school pre-pandemic. And so it felt like we were just asking for things for kids who are neurodivergent.
Hmm.
But now we have so many more kids who are struggling with depression and anxiety. So now there's even a bigger population, I think, in the schools who could benefit from lots of these different things, not just animals.
When we find that the animals help to reduce the stigma because everyone is so open about talking about how animals help improve their
Mm,
mental health. So if I took the most emotionally healthy person on the planet, but then I also paired them with an animal, they would probably be feeling even better. And what it helps us to realize is that we don't have everybody, like mental health, like self-esteem, isn't high or low. It's not good or bad. We're all a spectrum of people like a mountain
right.
range, and we have our good days and our bad days. And so the more we stop thinking about people with mental health issues in one category and healthy people in another category, and instead say we are all these people and we all benefit from the animal. And dogs are just a great way for your average person to open up and to feel like comfortable talking about the ways that those animals make them feel better. And then that helps us to open into so many other aspects of talking about mental health and the way that our mental health differences can actually be strengths. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's what we find is reducing the stigma through introducing the animal into the conversation.
I love that. It's so good. Let's talk a little bit about the process because I think
Hmm.
a lot of people don't even know where to get started. Obviously,
Hmm.
they can go to Paws for Patrick website. We'll link that up in the show notes and connect with your organization there. But just kind of if we could walk through that process a little bit so people understand what that might look like, that I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, so let's say a person realizes that if they have a mental health disability, or they think they might, and they are a young person, they could reach out to Pause for Patrick. But any person, if they're working with a therapist, they could say, "Hey, I think I might benefit from my animal or getting an animal to be an ESA." So they can talk to their therapist about writing them a letter, or even again, their psychiatrist, a medical doctor, anybody who's in their health team could write one of these letters. If that person's not sure how to do it, you can refer that person to Pause for Patrick. You can refer them to me, and I will teach people how to write these letters because it's a super easy thing to do once you learn how to do it. The main thing that has to go in the letter is the date, the fact that it has to be on the practitioner's letterhead. And as I say, the practitioner has to say that legally they are verifying that this person does have a disability and that it might be benefited. And that's really all that has to go into the letter. The person does not have to. So people are sometimes concerned. I don't necessarily want to share my diagnoses with my landlord or other people, and they don't have to. So, and people I think should be cautious about who gets their medical information. So again, if they're working with a medical practitioner, a therapist, anyone like that, they can ask them about it. And then once they get that letter, they can submit that to their landlord or to the university where they are living. Some places will say that it has to be renewed year after year. There's legally no reason for that. I mean, I wish anxiety ran out after a year. I
Yeah, me
wish
too.
ADHD stopped existing after a year. But, we find that it's often easier just to write an updated letter than to fight with people on it.
Yeah.
And so when talking to landlords and things like that about this experience, especially there are some people who don't fall under HUD and FHA, as I say, if it's an owner occupied two flat, they don't have to allow you to have your ESA. So just explaining to them, this is how the animal helps me to feel my best. And this is what it does for me. And then very frequently they'll be telling stories. If I'm that landlord, I'm nervous that my apartment's going to smell like cat pee. I want to make sure that I know that this animal's being taken care of. So the more you're expressing that you're responsible and that you're doing this for a reason, the more open they're probably going to be to that.
Yeah. And then what about training? I know you said there were different levels of training for, support
So
animals
as I
versus
said, training is not necessary.
at all for emotional. Okay.
Yeah. So for emotional support animals don't require any training whatsoever. They can, as I say, your fish or tarantula doesn't require any of it.
Well,
For
yeah.
those, as I say, therapy dogs, for the service animals, you're going to want to, again, for therapy dogs, reach out to Alliance for Therapy Dogs. For
Okay.
service animals, you're going to want to probably Google your zip code and service animal training to find something that's local to you.
Okay. Yeah. I just wonder about that process too. Like, I think, we think that it's going to be so expensive
Hmm.
to have any sort of support animal. So it's so
Hmm.
good to be letting everybody know here that an emotional support animal needs no specific
Hmm.
training.
Nope.
Obviously, I think you need a good connection with the animal.
Hmm.
They need to allow you to connect when you need to connect. But other than that, there's nothing specific. And then we moved to therapy dog, which you
Hmm.
said was a more moderate
Hmm.
cost, right?
Hmm.
Versus a service animal. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah, and
Wow.
we also we shouldn't be really trying to encourage people who are not animal people. There are some people who just don't like
Mm,
pets.
yeah.
And so
Yeah.
if your child doesn't really like animals and they don't enjoy interacting with them, let's not try to put a square peg into a round hole.
Mm-hmm.
Let's reinforce the things that are working, but not push for something that isn't there.
Such a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because there are kids who fear animals. There are kids who just don't connect with them. It's
Hmm.
not their wheelhouse, and for them, it's not going to be beneficial. You can force it on them, but it's not going to work because
Hmm.
they're not into it. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. Anything else we need to talk about before we wrap up? Anything else that you think people need to know about the process or just having that emotional support when it's needed?
Well, I just think the one other misconception that I'll share is a lot of the people there's a lot of angry people online who
Mm,
are they actually love emotional support animals, but they're nervous that the rights of emotional support animals are going to get taken away because of what they would deem like scam websites or things like that.
mm,
There are organizations like CertaPet or Petable that a person can go and they don't. So if you don't have a therapist and you want to find someone to write an emotional support animal for you, they will pair you with a clinician. And there is ethically and legally nothing wrong with CertaPet or Petable or any of these other organizations. These are clinicians who are actively interviewing a person and making sure that they meet the criteria.
okay.
So again, if you're hearing that, oh, you have to be working with the person for 3 months, or you have to be certified in a different way, that's not true. There are some limitations state by state, so you want to check in your state what the laws are. But in general, it's up to the clinician's judgment of does this person qualify. And again, when I was working in an emergency room, I had to decide in an hour if a person could go home or if they had to be hospitalized. So I think I can figure out in an hour whether or not a person might benefit from an emotional support animal. So,
Yeah.
and people say, well, why can't we make them wait a little bit longer? Well, I've worked with a couple of people who are in homeless shelters who won't leave for housing unless they can
Mm,
have their animal with them. This is really important to people. So why would we put extra barriers in the way of people who can truly benefit from this resource?
yeah. Such good work you're doing, and I appreciate all that you're doing to support emotional support animals, but also your work in mental health and just helping people. It's so great to get to be a helper in the world. I'm sure you feel that way too, and I appreciate each person who's doing that. So I thank you also for providing some of your time here and your wisdom and letting everybody know, really myth busting, because even I thought emotional support animals had some training, right? Like I even
Hmm.
came into this conversation and learned a good bit from you. So I know that it's really going to be beneficial to so many people. I do want to let everyone know that you can get links to Pause for Patrick as well as Dan's podcast and also anything that we've mentioned. So things like CertaPet and Petable, I will link all of that up for you at the show notes. And you can get those at parentingadhdandautism.com/262 for episode 262. And I certainly encourage everyone to connect and learn more and see if you or your child or your students at your school might benefit from some of the work that Pause for Patrick is doing. And I just thank you again, Dan. It was a pleasure. And I will see everyone next time. Take good care.